The 2012 presidential election series, China's Growth, the US's Decline, Awakening the Middle-Class Giant, a video book presentation. A video book is a narrated electronic book that can be streamed or played on your computer or in a DVD player. Unlike written or electronic books, quotes in video books are typically watched as video clips. This video book is by and for middle-class taxpayers. A production of the Public Square Today, hearing all sides following one truth. FBI warning. The information contained herein is fully copyrighted and therefore protected by the United States federal copyright law. All offenders will be prosecuted to the fullest extent under the law. U.S. policy with China: short-term gain, long-term loss. A middle-class CFO CPA's perspective. China is one of the main topics we're covering in our 2012 presidential election series because, like the other topics in our series, it elucidates the importance of governmental policy and how bad policy decisions, irrespective of political ideology, have grave, far-reaching consequences. As we develop this 2012 presidential election series, you'll discover a common failing to each of the economic difficulties facing the U.S. today. The failing is one of increased economic decision-making span of control by a subset of individual members of society, that is, governmental employees and officials who, because they have the same failings common to all men and women, are prone to make the very same mistakes, placing self-interest ahead of the interest of others, when personal financial gain is simply too significant to resist. Our video book series will make the case that if the middle-class taxpayer does not begin to consistently demand results or consequences for poor policy decisions made by governmental officials promoting their own self-interest under the guise of national best interest, this cannot change, and indeed history, as we will show, proves it has been repeated in obvious ways over the past 50 to 70 years. Our goal: to awaken the greatest economic power in America today, the middle-class taxpayer, to use the control and authority it rightfully and currently possesses. Let us begin our first study in this 2012 presidential election series on China. In May 1993, the President Clinton White House, with great excitement, announced a tremendous victory for the American people, one that would pave the way to revitalize America's economic future. It was the press release announcing former President Clinton's and Democratic Congresswoman Pelosi's decision to grant most favored nation status to the communist nation of China. This is a copy of that press release. We've highlighted in gold those areas we wish to emphasize. The first is the goal to revitalize America's economic future. The second and third goals were to improve the environment and weapons proliferation in the region. You can see that it was championed by Congresswoman Nancy Pelosi and President Clinton. As stated in the press release, the objectives Clinton and Pelosi insisted this change in policy would accomplish were, first, to revitalize America's economic future, second, to have a positive effect on the environment in the region, and third, to positively impact weapons proliferation in the region. This is a copy of the map of China. Prior to President Clinton and Pelosi's change in U.S. policy, the U.S. had denied China MFN status for 39 years, beginning in 1952 after it invaded Tibet in 1951, a then sovereign nation rich in shale gas reserves. Indicated on your map by the Tibetan Plateau, it is no longer an independent nation. The U.S. had historically refused China MFN status because it is a communist nation that had aligned itself with Russia in support of its enemies and in support of U.S. enemies. You can see here in this map that Russia is located to the north of China. Prior administrations had never wanted to provide U.S.'s enemies with military capabilities, so China had been banned from MFN status, like Russia, to make it more difficult to obtain nuclear armaments. Additionally, China had been and continues to be an offender of human rights. This slide is a graphic we will use throughout the remainder of this presentation to provide a roadmap of sorts of the key milestones and progression of events that led to present-day environmental, economic, and national security issues surrounding U.S. and China foreign policy. As shown in the green bubble to the left of the Start Here blue square in the upper right-hand corner of your screen, the process begins with MFN status granted by the Clinton administration. The next bubble to the left depicts the first step in the growth of China's economic strength, which began with textile and low-tech U.S. companies outsourcing jobs to manufacturers in China. Initially, this created a favorable situation for American consumers who received clothing and other low-tech goods at much reduced prices. The lower quality of the goods was initially conceded by American consumers because the cost of the goods was so low. In time, more and more industries recognized the low-cost business environment China offered, so that now, only 20 years later, after Pelosi's and Clinton's 1993 change to U.S. policy with China, China has become the second largest global economy ahead of Japan and the second largest consumer of oil, only behind the U.S. With China, for the first time, Asia leads the world in oil consumption ahead of North America, as you can see indicated in consumption at the bottom of the screen. This is also true economically. Consider that Japan worked 70 years since World War II to achieve the second largest global economic position, yet China, with the help of the Clinton administration and Pelosi Congress, assumed the position in only 2 short decades, in 1/3 the time. As we progress to the purple bubble number 3, we observe that improved margins made U.S. products more competitive, encouraging still more manufacturers in different industries to move to China as well. These short-term gains resulted in increased economic growth because of the improved cost competitiveness of American products. Improved profit margins resulted in increased share prices, so that Wall Street gains also resulted. This led to increased pension and retirement asset values, so that all in all, the U.S. gained in practically every short-term area imaginable. As corporate investment left the U.S. to go to China, more and more investment in the China industrial complex occurred, resulting in increased numbers of jobs leaving the U.S. to go to China. However, longer-term strategic changes also resulted. China's government didn't stand still, but actively responded to the U.S. investment in economic growth by, for one, modifying its education system, placing greater emphasis on STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, disciplines. As a result, in the 20 years since 1993, while the U.S. argues with teachers unions over COL, or cost of living adjustments, China is graduating more engineers than any other nation in the world, creating a workforce that is not only highly skilled but also highly motivated to succeed. Inherent to Chinese culture is a significantly higher level of discipline than in the West. Additionally, Chinese culture lacks the high level of distraction or attention, entertainment, and leisure industries command of American or Western youth. Together, these factors, higher foreign investment, education emphasis for 20 years on STEM disciplines, cultural emphasis on discipline without the entertainment, leisure obsession of the West, have converged to create the perfect economic storm for the U.S., with a nearly complete shift in the competitiveness of the labor forces of the U.S. and China, with formerly higher skilled U.S. labor beginning to be replaced by a more educated and more productive Chinese labor force. It is important to note that these changes have taken 2 decades to establish, making some experts suggest that U.S. exceptionalism may be a thing of the past. In the article Global Manufacturing, the author Pinto explores some of the benefits higher skill or higher paying jobs are providing to the Chinese citizen, with the creation of a middle class that is today larger than the U.S.'s middle class. While the relative purchasing power of the Chinese middle class is substantially lower or smaller than that of the middle class in the U.S., Chinese upward mobility is evidenced here as well. Pinto declares, after years of struggling to crack the Chinese market, U.S. multinationals like General Motors, Procter & Gamble, and Motorola are finally reaping rich profits. They're making cell phones, shampoos, autos, and PCs in China and selling them to the Chinese middle class. Various sources estimate the size of the middle class in China to be approximately 100 to 200 million. U.S. companies are no longer investing in much new capacity, and the ranks of U.S. engineers are thinning. By contrast, the number of Chinese engineers is growing by 350,000 annually. Young workers and managers are willing to put in 12-hour days and work weekends with an entrepreneurial zeal to do whatever it takes to please big U.S. retailers, such as Walmart. And Chinese producers are hardly standing still. In a recent survey of Chinese and U.S. manufacturers by Industry Week, 54% of Chinese companies cited innovation as one of their top objectives, while only 26% of U.S. respondents did. Chinese companies spend more on worker training and enterprise resource management software, and 91% of U.S. plants are more than a decade old versus 54% in China. More innovation, better goods, lower prices, newer plants. Unless America can deal with the new industrial realities, it will suffer a loss in economic power and influence. Bottom line, when countries quit generating economically viable or globally valuable ideas, their national economies begin to fail. To generate globally valued ideas, innovation and creativity is required. To enable innovation, citizens with high levels of skill or education are required. So the key question regarding the economic stability for any country is the extent to which it possesses the key traits required in innovation. In a recent survey by the Boston Consulting Group, the nations of the world were ranked for innovative friendliness. China's Hong Kong was ranked 6th, the U.S. 8th, Japan 9th. What were the top 2 nations? South Korea was 2nd and Singapore was 1st. Among the characteristics mentioned as most desirable were governmental policies supporting STEM, science, technology, and engineering, mathematics, education, workforce quality, infrastructure, trade route access or proximity, speed of delivery to markets. Additionally, performance of or business results were considered, R&D results, overall business performance, employment skill growth, and other impacts of innovation. Given the current state of the American economy, it's all the more critical that Americans consider how welcoming or hostile they are to the only societal institution that creates jobs or wealth, businesses and corporations. Per James Andrew of BCG, countries aren't innovative, companies are. And we would venture to say that people are. The choices that countries make have a profound impact on the ability of companies to be innovative, to attract and retain people, and other inputs that go into making innovation successful. For every dollar of investment in China, that's a dollar of investment that will not be made in an American community. Most of the concern about China's economic growth, hurting U.S. jobs, is focused on inexpensive exports made by low-wage Chinese workers. But critics say the real drag on jobs is Chinese competition for American business investment dollars, and it's a trend that's only picking up speed. The American Chamber of Commerce, the Beijing-based group that represents China, U.S. business interests there, said 79% of members surveyed in 2010 plan to increase their investment in China, with just over half projecting double-digit increases. This is according to CNN. Now let's go to a few pictures of what worker conditions look like in the older Chinese textile factories and more modern foreign GM automated factories. If you're like the authors, you thought most of the Chinese factories look like the one noted in this picture. However, the next two slides reveal the real level of U.S. automation and manufacturing investment in facilities and equipment in China. Notice the GM plant is manufacturing cars for the Chinese market. As we consider the economic boom in China and the economic bust in America, let's consider more specifically the purchasing power of the Chinese middle class. This is a picture of a major thoroughfare in Beijing. Notice the newness and the number of vehicles. Looks like a city street in America. Historically, China's automotive industry had consisted of Soviet models built with the help of Russia. After receiving MFN status in 1993, China's auto industry grew rapidly. One author notes, China's auto industry has been in rapid development since the early 90s. After China's entry into the WTO in 2001, the development of the automobile market further accelerated. In 2009, China produced nearly 14 million automobiles and surpassed the United States as the world's largest automobile producer by volume. In 2010, both sales and production topped 18 million units, the largest by any nation in history. So we see yet another source confirming the fact that the growth in Chinese industry began in the early 90s, corresponding to its receipt of MFN status by Clinton and Pelosi. Further, China received another boost in growth in 2001 when it was accepted into the WTO, also pushed by Clinton in 2000 as confirmed in the CNN newsflash below. The significance of MFN status in 1983 and WTO membership in 2001 are demonstrably evident in the chart below, as China's appetite for petroleum grew, commensurate with the growth in its industrial complex, the growth in its nation's economy, and the growth in its middle class. Now it's time to revisit Clinton and Pelosi's stated objectives regarding the change in U.S. policy with China and its MFN status and what that would bring to the U.S. Clinton was instrumental in China's acceptance to the WTO in 2000, which became effective in 2001, and underscores his convictions regarding his and Pelosi's MFN 1993 economic objectives. But have they been achieved? We've only considered the first of these, revitalize America's economic future. Based on what you've learned, do you believe this has been achieved? Based on the exporting of tens of millions of high-skilled jobs from America to China, the boom in China's economy, it's been growing at least 2 to 3 times that of the U.S. economy since the 1990s, and anemic growth in America's economy. The increased size and purchasing power of China's middle class, recall China consumes more vehicles annually than the U.S., China's investment in STEM disciplines to produce a better educated and higher skilled workforce, etc. There's plenty of evidence that China has clearly benefited, but little evidence that America has benefited beyond the short-term gains of the 90s and 2000s. In fact, we submit that the migration of U.S. corporate investment dollars from the U.S. and into China, along with the increased competitiveness and skill level of the Chinese labor force, suggests that the U.S. has lost significantly and simply, perhaps, irreparably. Thus, we believe Objective 1 has not been established in a way that strengthens or revitalizes America's economic future. Instead, the change in policy we, the middle-class taxpayer, enabled by voting for Clinton and paid for, has perhaps devastated America's economic future in ways that we may still be unaware, and created an economic power in China that is so powerful that the brightest future seems to be outside the U.S. This seems to be an excellent example of the type of governmental policy the U.S. doesn't need. Thus, it goes without saying that it also indicates the type of policymakers America should avoid. So we'd have to say Clinton and Pelosi's first objective has failed, that is, to revitalize America's economic future. Now let's move on to the second. Has this change positively affected the environment? Here's a slide of a small, older industrial complex in China's rural countryside. The next three slides are courtesy of the environmental activist group Greenpeace. Textile and electronic manufacturing require the use of harsh chemicals. In China, there are virtually no environmental controls, so these toxins are placed directly into waterways. This final slide shows human excrement from a sewage system discharging into a waterway that will ultimately find its way into the Yellow Sea. Let's get back to the map we saw earlier, which also provides the major rivers in China. We've added the approximate locations of the waterways affected by the pollution shown in the previous slides, plus we've noted the location of Hong Kong so you understand the location of the air pollution in the next slide. This slide shows atmospheric pollution over Hong Kong, which China has governed in lieu of the British since 1997. This next slide shows pollution in a suburb in Beijing. This is pollution in Lake Taihu. According to this source, there is a thick layer of toxic green scum and floating brown foam on this lake, which is the largest or one of the largest freshwater lakes in China. Despite 20 years commensurate with China's economic growth since 1993 of a battle to clean up the lake, which cost Chinese citizen environmental activist Wu 3 years in jail, the lake still looks as it does in this recent 2011 photo, and is claimed to have a rancid or foul odor. In this next picture, Chinese citizens fish in a river in Beijing. What's missing from this picture? In the U.S., wouldn't you expect to see a no fishing or no swimming sign? This is yet more water pollution in the south of China along its seacoast. The source for this photo declares that China suffers from widespread water pollution, with more than 200 million people without safe access to safe drinking water. Again, a rarity in the U.S. we maintain is due to the vast difference in the values of each of these nations. This photo to the left is of a port off the coast of China. Take note of the size of the floating bed of green algae relative to the size of the multi-story buildings along the shore. Algae is dangerous because of the toxins it emits, and its absorption of oxygen suffocates marine life, fish, etc. The photo on the right shows Chinese workers wading through one of the many deep and vast algae beds that have overtaken many of China's waterways and rivers because of the pollution contaminants from manufacturing and agriculture. This is an aerial photo of water pollution so thick it can be seen from altitudes high above the earth. While the pollution in China is on the land, in the sea, and in the air, it is because of the high level of convenience associated with dumping undesirable manufacturing byproducts, chemicals, resins, etc. into the ocean where most of China's industrial complex is located that makes water pollution, some scientists believe, all the more problematic, as we've shown in this presentation. Here's another slide showing the brown sediment pollution off the coast of China. Again, the pollution is so significant it is clearly visible from space. In this next picture, we have a child waist-deep in e-pollution. China confiscates used e-waste or electronic parts that Chinese citizens wade through to earn money. It's similar to collecting plastic bottles and aluminum cans in the U.S. We'll show you what they do with these confiscated used parts later in this presentation. In this next slide, we've quantified China's high-tech manufacturing relative to the U.S. The two nations are in a dead heat, again validating the source or causes for the pollution we've seen in the previous slides. Let's again revisit the Clinton-Pelosi objectives regarding question 2 and the environment. We would have to say it too has been answered in the negative, but let's consider the unfortunate and destructive for the planet irony. We've clearly established how Clinton pushed and continues to push for China's acceptance onto center stage of the world's global economy. Recall Clinton's 1993 MFN status push, just 3 short years later, congressional investigations uncovered illegal Chinese campaign contributions from the Chinese military he received to run campaign ads to win re-election in 1996. In the very same month he regained re-election, November, Clinton signed waivers to allow the exporting of chipset technologies that experts believe China used to make significant advancements in its nuclear weaponry. And then 5 short years after that, Clinton lobbied for China's acceptance into the WTO, which occurred in 2001, as we've stated. So Clinton succeeded at empowering China, which has become the world's #1 polluter, outdoing the pollution of the Industrial Revolution in the West a century ago. And then his VP cohort, Gore, took to the streets as the chief advocate of the environment, beating up on American industry for its destruction of the planet. All the while, ironically, Clinton and Gore worked to enable greater destruction of the planet in China. This is sardonic, mocking irony of the cruelest form, aimed at and paid for by the middle-class taxpayer, who has rightly become the laughingstock of the world. We believe the foregoing evidence makes plain the fact that Clinton Pelosi failed with regard to the environment as well. Now it's time to return to our roadmap graphic. We're at bubble 4, the green and the red. China's demand for oil affected oil demand in such a significant way that global prices for all the nations of the world have been impacted, and China's pollution has brought untold harm to the planet. In this next slide, we're told China is the most populous country, which we're familiar with. Its demand is surging, and at the time of this report, it was the 3rd largest net importer of oil. That was 6 years ago in 2006. Today it is the 2nd largest, as we've noted. Note the rate of China's economic growth, which was 10% in 2006, or 3 times faster than the US GDP of 2.7% in the same year. Here's a graph of global oil demand through 2006, with China in the #3 position behind Japan through 2001. Once Clinton pushed for China's acceptance into the WTO, China's growth rose so fast that only 5 years later it became the 2nd largest consumer of oil, behind the United States, and 2nd largest global economy. So intuitively we understand that China's entry into the global market space at such a rapid pace had to impact demand for natural resources in a significant way. We've only considered oil consumption, but this was also true of water, wood, iron ore, rubber, plastic as a derivative, and other natural resources. However, regarding oil, we can see that China's increased oil demand has the nations of the world scrambling to meet it, like Canada and the Canadian XL pipeline that we've seen and heard so much of in the evening news. According to some sources, Russia is also developing its petroleum reserves, giving it more economic wealth than its sale of armaments ever did, because oil produces a recurring revenue stream at much higher margins. In fact, today, Russia is said to have more millionaires per capita in several of its cities, depending upon the sources that you use, than in any other nation in the world. Furthermore, Russia's debt to GDP is only 7%, versus the US's in excess of 100%. So oil exploration seems to be quite lucrative for every nation that engages in it, whether we're talking of the Middle East and the OPEC nations, Russia, or Canada. The question we're asking as responsible stewards of the environment is which country should be preferred when it comes to satisfying global oil demand via oil exploration and other dangerous technologies. The world hopefully remembers the horrors of Chernobyl and Russia's treatment of its environment and its own people due to the lack of maintenance of its own nuclear reactors. The evidence provided in this presentation seems to suggest similar environmental results in China. Again, the question we're asking as global consumers is if we're serious about pollution and protecting the environment, how much recycling in the US and EPA emissions regulation is necessary to offset or undo the catastrophic harm being done around the clock 24/7 by China. The concern we have is that while the Industrial Revolution of the West resulted in pollution, those who were polluting at the time lacked the scientific evidence linking their actions to harmful environmental effects. However, the understanding science has provided over the past century doesn't permit China to claim similar ignorance. In this regard, especially given its emphasis on STEM education, it knows exactly what it's doing. All we can assume is that the cultural values of the West or America are very different from those of China and Russia. They say a picture is worth 1,000 words, so here we have a Chinese... They say a picture is worth 1,000 words, so here we have a satellite tracking vessel. Kind of looks like one of ours, doesn't it? But it's not. It's a Chinese vessel. And the gentleman in the lower right-hand corner kind of looks like one of our astronaut suits, but again, it's a Chinese satellite launch employee. Here again we're showing you the brown sediment pollution off the coast of China. Whether you're a fan of democracy or communism, you still have to live on the planet, and perhaps it's mere coincidence, but communist China and communist Russia seem to be less concerned about the sanctity of human, animal, and environmental life or health than the West. Can you imagine what would have happened if the earthquake disaster in Japan had occurred in Russia, affecting several of its nuclear reactors? Remember the BP oil spill in 2010? Here's a satellite image of the oil slick in the right photo. On the left, we've reproduced the satellite image we just saw a moment ago of water pollution off the coast of China. Because the altitudes are similar, our point is all the more valid. In each of these situations, how does the polluting nation deal with its pollution? In China's instance, the pollution is not accidental or unintentional, but volitional and willful. In the BP oil spill, the occurrence was unintentional, accidental, not willful. In this next slide, we have images from the BP oil spill and the cleanup effort that is ongoing. This was nothing short of an environmental disaster as well. However, as we've seen in the previous slides, do we see any evidence to compare here with the slides we saw in China of similar concern over pollution in China that we see in the States? Recall 200 million Chinese aren't even provided safe drinking water by their protective, paternal communist Chinese government. Recall Chinese citizens fishing in an obviously foul, highly polluted river. Recall one of China's few environmental activists who was placed in jail for 3 years because he was trying to make people aware of the increasing pollution in one of China's largest freshwater lakes. Recall the raw sewage dumping into China's Yellow River, and now ask yourself, would you expect to see birds being cared for by Chinese workers using fresh water that isn't even available to Chinese citizens to clean them and try to help them? Would you ever expect to see labor and water deployed to clean beaches, as shown in the bottom left-hand photo? What about the diver in the lower right photo? Would China or Russia ever deploy divers to investigate ocean floor contamination if they had an oil spill? The technology advancements of BP that it made through offering private sector contests are astounding and helped and continue to help the cleanup efforts. John Stossel did an excellent report on this. However, where is the level of effort found in nations like China? Consider once more Japan's handling of an involuntary disaster, a natural earthquake, and its nuclear reactors. Compare it to Russia's handling of Chernobyl. Chernobyl was caused by willful failed maintenance. What is the only conclusion we can draw based upon this evidence? The conclusion is that Russia and China are irresponsibly dangerous nations to continue to empower economically. They show little evidence of any desire to treat human and animal life with dignity and respect. For anyone who cares about the planet as a global consumer and Western voter, you simply cannot make the case to support China or Russia through U.S. policy, which means you can't vote for politicians who support policy that supports the increased empowerment of China, Russia, or the OPEC nations as well. And we're working on a separate presentation on the OPEC nations and have found that we can draw similar conclusions to those we're applying here. If petroleum must be explored to meet increasing global demand, we need to consider which countries of the world should be trusted with our purchasing dollars at the pumps and votes at the voting booths in November to take the greatest precautions. As you consider life on Earth, oil consumption is not going away anytime soon, especially with the rate the Chinese, the most populous nation on the planet, is purchasing automobiles. Think also about the level of emissions being produced in China. How many Chevy Volts do you have to sell in the States to make up for the emissions or offset the emissions being produced by the middle class in China? If this is true, do you think the U.S.'s development of its oil reserves over and above allowing another country to do so is better for the planet in the long term? This would also be true of other technologies. Now let's move on to Clinton and Pelosi's last objective, national security. This article wasn't given much attention at the time. Newly declassified documents show that President Bill Clinton personally approved the transfer to China of advanced space technology that can be used for nuclear combat. The documents show that in 1996, Clinton approved the export of radiation-hardened chipsets to China. The President has approved a series of satellite-related waivers in recent months, most recently in November 1996, which was the month of his re-election, for export of radiation-hardened chipsets for a Chinese meteorological satellite. Another factor involved in the November 1996 waiver issued by then-President Clinton is the fact that illegal money entered the U.S. elections from the Chinese army. The 1996 Clinton-Gore campaign readily accepted much of the money from the Chinese army sources without question, and in some cases took these donations in cash. The Chinese army, to more accurately target American cities with atomic weapons, is using the advanced U.S. technology provided through these waivers granted by President Clinton. The legacy that President Clinton left for the 21st century is a modern Chinese army equipped for nuclear war. This article came out in October of 2008 in Business Week. Also wasn't given much media attention, but the Director of National Intelligence stated that counterfeit products have been linked to the crash of mission-critical networks and may also contain hidden backdoors enabling network security systems. These are military security systems to be bypassed and sensitive data to be accessed by hackers and spies. In the article, it stated that the dangerous fakes are coming from, you guessed it, China. Chinese employees in these photographs are sanding off markings and marketing the parts as reliable military-grade products. Notice again the pollution to the photograph on the left bottom. The dates are 100% fake because the products are pulled off computer boards from the 80s and 90s, while customers demand products from after 2000. And then these products are sold to the military. These next 4 slides provide pictures of China's military arsenal. They have, by some estimates, the largest standing army in the world. Notice the discipline of formation and the wealth in the weapons that we saw in the previous photograph, and manpower. Notice also China has adopted U.S. Special Forces training tactics in this last slide and has shown training with Pakistani military personnel. So we've come to the end of our roadmap. China's wealth in Bubble 5 has undoubtedly grown into a now $11 trillion economy, 75% or 3/4 the size of the US GDP, which has enabled it to finance the US by purchasing US government debt in Bubble 6. And finally in Bubble 7 we arrive at present day, with China issuing threats against the US both militarily and financially. So we have to ask ourselves whether Clinton and Pelosi's number 3 objective was achieved, i.e., have we seen a positive effect on national security? From the previous slides, we hope the answer to that question is obviously a resounding no. In the conclusion, what did we learn? We hope you learned what we learned from doing the research, and that is that the U.S. has lost much in the exchange with China that was initiated by former Democratic President Clinton in 1993 and Pelosi in Congress. The U.S. has lost jobs, scores of jobs, we estimate 10 to 15 million over the past 20 years, at increasing rates. For more details on the transfer of wealth that the U.S. middle class taxpayers paid for, we've got some additional subsets in this 2012 presidential election series that we hope you'll keep your eye out for. It's so important to realize that policy and politics work in this way, that seemingly innocuous decisions like MFN status for China, which most Americans thought little of at the time, have effects upon our nation and the globe that are sometimes irreversible. The U.S. economy can only sustain so many bad policy decisions. There's a hard limit. Just as the human body gives way to disease after exposure to a specific number of molecular contaminants, so goes the U.S. economy. Bad decisions or bad policy produces bad results, and there is a breaking point. We thank you for your time. Watch the other video books on our list to unconfuse you as you vote in the 2012 election. You've just finished China. If you're confused about how to vote in the 2012 election, give us 2 hours of your time and we'll unconfuse you. Thank you. Contact us at china@awakenthemiddleclassgiant.com for more details.